worry about little things that mean nothing, or worry about big things all the time for good reason? Well, anxiety in the mind, it affects all of us. I mean, heck, look at me. I got water all over my shirt trying to give my toddler a bath before streaming tonight. So I've got no shortage of anxiety in my life, just like I'm sure you don't either. We're going to talk about it all tonight, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're live. All right, my man, Norty, how we doing this week? What is the latest in your life? What is worrying you, my friend?
It's draft season, right? Who are the Bears gonna take tomorrow in the
If you're a
first round?
Bears fan, you've got plenty of reason for anxiety in your life. That's for sure. On that note, if you've got anxiety or questions, leave them in the chat. Tell us what bothers you so we can answer your questions tonight. Okay.
How's bath time?
Bath time was chaotic. Mostly because for whatever reason, my daughter, when I went to wash her hair real quick before logging into stream tonight, she decided to have a meltdown. I got water all over my shirt.
Been there.
Look like I look like a disaster, albeit I actually feel pretty good. But yeah, that's what's going on right now. My wife's out of town for an academic conference, so I am solo parenting, although I got tons of help from my mom. So super happy about that. But admittedly, life is just a tad bit more chaotic this week.
A little more stressful, a little bit more anxiety-inducing.
A little bit, a little less time to shave the face, change the shirt. But that's all right. We persevere. We push on. What about you?
Man, like I said, just working. I'm excited. I am a football fan. I am excited for the draft. It's not anxiety-inducing.
Okay.
But on the topic of anxiety, I feel like it's human nature to be anxious and fearful of the unknown, right? I think that's where a lot of anxiety stems from for people.
Yeah.
I'd like to say I'm an anxious person by nature, but I try to really work on that and keep my anxiety levels to a low, just so it doesn't ruin a good time.
So what do you think is anxiety? Truly anxiety, something you worry about unnecessarily too much.
I think it's trying
versus like just the enjoyment of anticipation.
Yeah, and I think that's the differentiator, right? Is when you're trying to interpret outcomes and hoping they go the way you want them to, right? Like that's how I would almost break down anxiety.
All right, so on the note of the draft, what are your hopeful outcomes for the draft?
Man, like this is a
what
tough.
Would make a perfect Chicago Bears draft? Not that I have any interest in a Chicago Bears draft, but
yeah, man,
I'll indulge for a moment.
So we traded the number 1 overall pick for DJ Moore. Good move. All right. And then now it's who are we going to take at? I forget what number we've been drafting. 9, something like that.
Bears had the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, man.
Were they that bad last year?
They were that bad last year. And here's the kicker is the Houston Texans won their last game of the season. Otherwise, they would have had the overall pick. So Lovie Smith, prior Bears coach, secured the number 1 pick for the Bears. And because of that, we were able to trade for DJ Moore and move back in the draft and still have a great draft pick on the table. So my call for this one, this is a solid draft for the Bears because I'm hoping they either get the guy out of Georgia, the defensive tackle, or if Bijan Robinson, the running back out of Texas, is there, I think that's the perfect fit for the Bears offense.
Gotcha. Well, welcome to the chat there. No brain wasting his youth away. He's causing anxiety. Sounds like you're in med school. My sympathies to you, my friend. Hopefully, if my assessment is correct, you're not worrying too much about USMLE exams. They are a thing that pass and an anxiety that does not last forever. However, you want to talk about peak anticipatory anxiety. I guess, now it would be the night before your step 2 exam. For me, it was the night before the step 1 exam, which has since gone to pass fail. But the step 1 exam, or now step 2 exam, was a career and life altering exam, which in hindsight is kind of stupid, but people are so stuck in their ways with these stupid board exams, and not just in medicine. I mean, really anywhere in the world, right?
With everything.
Or any profession. There's always some stupid metric that means nothing. And for some reason, we get so wrapped around the axle on these things.
And I think that's like these stakes get assigned to everything, right? Like there's stakes attached to everything you do in life. Yeah. And if for whatever reason it doesn't work out, you feel like, oh no, what am I going to do now? Like I feel like that is anxiety in a nutshell, is all of these stakes that we put on every little thing in every aspect of life.
Yeah. And actually, that's why I think now, if we going back to the topic of academics specifically, if you asked me when I was an undergraduate student, I would have probably told you like grades are stupid or something like that, right? In hindsight, though, when I really think about it, I'm like, of all the things I've encountered in my long years of being in various academic scenarios, GPA is honestly probably the best measurement of academic success. Can you hear my daughter like squealing in the background? I can't tell.
Just a little bit.
A little bit.
It's not too bad though. It's minor.
Right. Like I said, we're surviving over here in the rad house. We're making it work. That's okay. When you got toddlers, you're never gonna have a toddler-free life. That's just how it goes. But honestly, the thing is with a GPA, you can have some tests and things like that can get like really, anxiety ridden. But by and large, you can make mistakes and not be eternally punished with your GPA. Like, sure, maybe you just barely miss a cutoff. Like, I won't get into the details, but like, I remember being so annoyed when I was at the end of the semester I was graduating, because I had just missed like the GPA cutoff for a thing by like 0.0001 points or something like that. And I went to the registrar and I was like, really? You can't like round up? And they're like, well, we only round for like 0.00001. Like, you're basically off by an order of magnitude for us to round. I was like, this is the stupidest thing.
I would have lost it. Yeah.
At the end of the day, like, the number is still the number, right? Nobody's looking at like the award or like whatever attached to that number. And that number is something you spend years building a portfolio of, right? It's not like one test like in medical school, right? Your career prospects hinge on the results of one test, right? You could be literally
stakes are higher at that point.
Phenomenal student, and then one test you have, like, that's your one day out of 100 where you had a bad day academically, and your whole career is like in jeopardy. That to me is very, like, that's anxiety ridden for like good reason. And I don't think those types of things belong in academics.
No, and I think that's why there's people who are bad test takers because of that exact thing, right? Like, anxiety plays such a part in these things where it can take away from what you're actually trying to prove. Like, the person may have all the answers, but the fact there's a time constraint, or the fact that it is weighted so heavily on whatever it is they're trying to do, like, these things play a factor. And I think that was my point, is anxiety plays a part in everyday life for everybody in some form or fashion. Whether it's healthy or not. I sent you a handful of articles. I think overall it can be very unhealthy if it's not managed. But I guess you could make the counterpoint that if you're anxious about something, it probably means that you care. Just in most situations, I'd say you care.
I mean, there's a lot of things that I think people, the ability, and because I think there's an important distinction, right, between normal anxiety and what we call pathologic anxiety. And this sort of stems from some of the conversation we had last week. Anxiety it's an emotion. It's an experience. I don't think it's something we're meant to not experience, right? The question just becomes, do you experience it to a degree and a magnitude that's so severe it prohibits you from functioning in life? In which case,
Right.
now you're starting to get more into like the pathological realm of anxiety that somebody might see a psychiatrist for and actually be medically treated for. But by and large, the rest of us that don't have pathological anxiety, we're still experiencing anxiety, and it's forging us as human beings and our experience on this earth. And, I think that non pathological anxiety is, I don't know. I think how you handle it is important. I think it's important, thinking as a parent, like teaching, not trying to raise children who never have or live a life anxiety free, right?
Right.
Like
It's
teaching my kids, like, a Hakuna Matata life is not the goal. The
well,
goal,
it's also not realistic, right? Like there are things
yeah.
to
I mean, I
worry
think it's
about.
realistic for
Yeah.
some people with enough money and enough resources, right? And that's
Is
why
there,
you get these like, I don't know, like trust fund babies or whatever they call them that grow up with literally no cares in the world, and they turn out to be like
yeah, and
99% of them terrible human beings
I just
or
think
whatever.
there's always something to stress about. Like money solves some of the surface level
Yeah.
stresses, I'm sure, and I'm sure it makes things a whole lot easier to swallow. But I guarantee you ask them, like there's things they stress about, get anxious about.
Well, yeah. Well, now, I mean, now we're getting into like, we're very quickly sliding into more, I think, like theological and spiritual territory, right? Materialism, right? What is it? What is happiness?
Yeah, and that's
You
what,
know,
yeah, and
how
I
do you
think that
find contentment?
I think the two can go hand in hand for sure. Um, but yeah, I think anxiety doesn't stop with just having things accessible to you.
Well,
I
yeah,
think part of it, what was it? I think there's varying degrees of anxiousness, right? Like in the clinic, what would you call it? Clinical or something? Or
clinical anxiety.
clinical anxiety, right? When it's actually taking away from your ability to do something. And like when I think of that, like I get anxious about things when things are coming up or I don't know the outcome and I'm worried about something going the right way. Like I have those type of anxieties. And then I also get social anxiety. Like being out in public in crowded spaces like really bothers me and sometimes it's worse than others, right? Like
Interesting.
and that one I would, it very rarely will stop me from doing something, but there's been times where it has, right? It's like I got to go. I can't be here. I got to go. I got to leave. And like a
So
handful of times, but it gets bad.
I have two questions.
Yep.
One is, do you feel that those experiences make you physically anxious, like kind of jittery, restless, a compulsion to leave, kind of as you said? Or is
Mhm.
it like so emotionally exhausting where you're like, I'm spent, now it's time for me to go home?
So I think it depends. Like there's times where the mental exhaustion from anxiety is like I'm just it's taking a toll on my body. Like I'm worn down. I just don't want to do anything. Right. But I've been in situations where I'm out and it's like I am itchy. I'm itchy. Like I have to
Yeah.
go or I'm going to like just full blown panic. And I don't know. I just got to get out of there. It's a physical
Interesting.
itchiness. So
Yeah.
that's where like I classify those two as different, but I feel like I've experienced varying degrees of each one.
Interesting. Because the reason I ask is
Mhm.
because I do think it sounds like that's probably what I'm about to describe is not necessarily what you're experiencing, but there's this other, thing, idea, perspective that's been tossed around that I've, heard people discuss, of how sort of this idea of like introvert versus extrovert not being, we think of like, oh, that person's an introvert or this person's an extrovert, just sort of how they behave on the outside.
Mhm.
But I've also kind of heard this idea of like, well, really, like an introvert is someone where social interactions sort of draw on their energy stores and they feel exhausted after social interactions. Whereas an extrovert feels more like their energy is being renewed by social interaction. And like after a night out with friends, like they're energized, they're rejuvenated. Whereas the introvert will maybe still go out, do the same things, phenotypically act the same. But at the end of the night, they're like emotionally exhausted, they're spent, and then they need time to like recover.
And it's funny because I am definitely on the introvert side of things. And it like I work in sales, right? So I have to interact with people and I
Yeah.
have for a long time and it's always worn me out because it is like, and same when I would even go out with my friends, it's like it's this facade of like I have to be social even though I really don't want to, and I would much
But you're
rather just
capable of doing
I'm
it, right?
capable
You
of
don't
doing
act like
so.
this sullen, like
Right.
Gollum-esque person that just hides in the corner when you're out, right?
There's light.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
no,
you
it's not that. Like I have the ability
yeah.
to interact. It's just I would honestly prefer not to. Majority of the time. Like
Yeah, I
obviously
mean,
there's some
honestly, I'm
days.
kind of the same way too. I feel like I feel like my wife is more of the extrovert-ish type. I don't
Mhm.
want to like definitely say that's definitively how she is, but she's the type of person who like social interaction very often does rejuvenate her. Whereas for me, it's like
It's
I
taxing, man.
want to hang out with people. I enjoy going out and doing things, but like it literally, like I have to recover from that type
Same.
of thing. Like it really exhausts me. Whereas I'm meant to just kind of like, I don't know, mow my grass,
Yeah, I just want to do my
eat
own thing.
peas, read a book,
Yeah.
read research articles, write papers, whatever the task is. I could sit in front of my computer and work for hours on end
Mhm.
on who knows what, Excel spreadsheets. Doesn't matter. Like,
Yeah.
but put
But
me
again,
out in a social setting, like I could do that like once every other month or so, if
yeah.
that.
And like even I would prefer less than that. But if I have to, I can. And
Yeah.
it's just it's a preference. So like I've definitely experienced that side of things, but there to round this to circle back and tie this all together, like I have definitely experienced that, but I have experienced like the itchiness to just like I cannot be here. Like I'm anxious. I can't fully describe why.
Yeah.
Like,
I
I
can't
need to
say I've
go.
really ever experienced
Yeah.
that. I don't think. I can't think of an example. Can you give us like would you feel comfortable like giving an
Oh yeah.
example of like a
The
scenario?
the most the one that I can think of. So I was at this was I don't even know how many years ago. I was at my buddy's bachelor party. It's a group of guys. We were going out in Wrigleyville and we were at some bar. And like once like I was okay up until that point. We had been, I think we went to a Cubs game at like the rooftops. So like we had been in crowds like all day, and I was fine. I was like, yeah, it's not what I like to do. I don't prefer to do that, but I was perfectly fine with it all day. We get to one bar and I am just itchy. Like I am itchy and like just cannot wait to leave. And I'm just looking at everybody. I'm just looking at everybody. I'm like, everyone is collapsing around me. My bubble feels like everyone
Hmm.
is on top of me and I need to go. And what set it off for me, and like I'm a very relaxed individual. Like I'm not looking to start any trouble. I'm not looking to do anything. But there were these one guys that were clearly my group of people were having a good time. And there were these two gentlemen that were like they just looked like they were like mocking us or whatever, not to our face. I was just staring at them like I'm gonna run over and I'm gonna punch them because I'm that itchy and like I just need to go. This is not a good situation. I have to get out of here. And I left.
Interesting.
But
Hmm.
I was itchy up to that point. So I'm
Interesting.
not sure if it was just too much interaction, but I don't like crowds.
Yeah.
And that's gotten worse as I get
Hmm.
older.
Interesting.
But that's the most specific example that I can think of. And I live in Chicago. Every time I go out, I feel like it's a crowd. So it's not like it affects me on
Yeah.
my day-to-day
I don't
life,
think
but
the
for whatever reason,
physical
that situation was really bad.
I don't think the physical crowd bothers me as much as the like take like a stranger and have like like a football game or something, and like that person that the stranger you're sitting next to, let that person be someone who keeps like trying to talk to me, and I'm like I gotta leave.
Yeah.
Whereas take I know plenty of other people. It doesn't matter who they are,
See,
stranger, no stranger. They just want to go and have a conversation.
yeah.
I'm like, nope,
Yeah, and
not me.
those I can handle those ones. It's when people get into my bubble. I don't
Hmm.
like touching people and I don't like people feeling like they're way too close to me. It's like you can take a step back.
Hmm.
I mean,
Interesting.
just stay out of my little zone here. So that's why like crowds where it's like
People
packed.
really do get
close.
like super finicky about their personal space. I never got the sense that I was like that, but
I am.
when when you go to boot camp, you meet all kinds of different people. And I remember there were people that would, because drill instructors, man, they'll get right up in your face.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm talking like this far away from you to the point, and they, those drill instructors, they'll be spitting on you while they're yelling at you, and you're like feeling their spit hit your. They do it on purpose, obviously. For me, I was like, oh, okay, that's part of their game, whatever. There were some people, man, where like it would, like literally, like it took every ounce of self-control they had to not just like punch the drill instructor when they would do this stuff. Like it really irked them.
Yep.
And that was something I just could never relate to. Never. Because I'm just like, whatever. They're just doing their thing, right? But man, some people, they hated it.
And this is what I some people in social settings, and we're getting into a whole different topic here. Like people have their preferences, and some things like set them off. Like I do not like people in my personal space. Like I like the people that I like. Those people can quasi get into my personal space, but even that a lot of times just like,
I hope next time we're together, I'm literally gonna get so close to you, you're gonna hate me.
See, but like we're cool, like that's fine, it won't bother me, but like definitely strangers.
It'll definitely bother you by the time the night's over. I assure you of that.
All right, well, we'll test it. We'll have an update for everybody next time we get the chance to meet up. But that's what, like, even that time when we got the chance to grab food before I had to fly back to Chicago, right? Like that whole experience exhausted me because I had to travel for work.
New York
City. I had to interact with people that I don't know really, and like it just sucked the life out of me. And the fact that it's in New York City where like you cannot have a personal bubble, like it was the worst case scenario for me all around.
I can definitely relate to that. I was not an optimal New York City liver, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Bishop, welcome to the show. Great to see you. We're doing great. How are you, my friend?
Got any fun anxiety-inducing scenarios for yourself, Bishop? Yeah. What is one situation? Have you ever had a situation where you've just gotten so itchy from anxiety, whether it be a test and that type of anxiety or a more like physical anxiety that it wasn't mental?
Physical anxiety,
like where you've just been itchy, like you're so like anxious or like worried or pent up about something where you just got to move. Even like I would classify that as anxiety.
No, honestly, I'm not a big physical responder to anxiety.
Would you consider yourself an anxious person in general? Like I feel like I worry about everything internally and I try not to let it out and compartmentalize it most of the time, but I feel like I'm always worried.
I am what I would call, I think everybody has tons of anxiety. I think everyone's anxiety is very different. I am a big picture anxiety guy. I do not get anxious about the little stuff at all. Right? I like details don't make me anxious. I'm sort of like, if I can see a path to the big picture, I'm like, I'll figure out the details as I go, right? I tend to be somebody who's very comfortable operating in the uncertain, like in the gray zone, right? As long as I kind of know where I'm going, even if I don't know how I'm going to get there, like I'm comfortable figuring that out. My wife, complete opposite. She wants every single step, every step of the way. And that, I mean, obviously that's something we've learned to like navigate, right? Like she's the more practical one.
I'll be cut out. I don't know. See when you come back.
Kind of like we will be it. There is, it does rear its head sometimes. What is this notification we just got? One of our platforms may have disconnected. Hopefully.
Well, you cut out for a second there.
Oh, maybe it was my personal connection wavered a little bit. Let's see. What's Bishop have to say? Bishop says, going on vacation, being afraid that my parents were going to put my dog down before I got home threw me into a massive tailspin and gave me a panic attack. Like, is this a real life story?
I think so.
Why were your parents going to put your dog down? Did you go on vacation when they were sick? Another more recent example of having to let go is someone that worked under me at work while also telling my team that their pay was getting messed up. Really put me in a bad headspace once everything was said and done. So it was like 10,000 pounds was lifted off my shoulders. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think that brings up a good topic of conversation. Like, maybe we'll call it caregiver anxiety. Like, or because I think dogs, I experienced this with my dog. I think my mother probably experienced this while she was taking care of my grandmother at end of life. If I had to venture, I guess I can think of like other people in my life where, I think when someone we know is sick, or in my case, right, we knew our dog was sick and his time was limited. You have a lot of like anxiety about when this like horrible event is going to finally happen, right? Because we work it up in our minds to be this horrible thing. When the reality is, it's actually a little bit of a blessing that we have this preparatory time to spend with them before they pass, as opposed to like a tragic car accident or, like my second dog was hit by a car. I was across the country. It was literally my best dog friend for 15 years or 12 years or however old he was. I never got to say goodbye. Never saw him again. I was like away on business and was just hit by a car and that's it. Never saw him. Never got to, whereas my other dog, we knew like it was coming to an end and, we got to, give him extra treats and extra belly rubs and take him on extra long walks, for the last couple of weeks before he finally passed. And it was like incredibly sad. Right? But this huge burden of relief, the anxiety had finally passed once the event of them passing it. And I think similar things happen with caregivers, right? With people, the anxiety over an impending death that we all know is coming. But then the reality is there's actually a lot of relief when it finally does just happen and it comes and goes and it's sad, but then the recovery and the healing process can begin.
Yeah. I think that's definitely, I think there's two sides to that coin, right? Like I think there's the fear of the unknown or even possible impending doom. And then there's the build up to a big event that is coming and just waiting for it to happen and have that weight lifted. Like it's
Bishop seems like he's got some problems with his groomsmen over here. With their little hands and little feet.
Oh yeah. Classic. Classic. Not everybody can be super tall.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
I mean, I'm not exactly a man of great physical stature, but I like to think that I'm 10 feet tall inside.
I am average in height, and sometimes some people like to poke fun at the fact that I'm shorter than them, and all my friends are above average in height.
Let me guess. Bishop's like 8 feet tall and weighs 120 pounds soaking wet.
If I had to guess, I would guess Bishop is probably like 6'2", 6'3", somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah.
6'2",
6'3".
That's above average.
Weighs 110 pounds, just skin and bones.
Oh,
one of those guys you wonder if he has a connective tissue disorder.
Yep, that sounds just about right.
Sounds right. I got your back, buddy. Don't worry.
Appreciate you.
So, all right, caregiver anxiety. I think that's an interesting perspective and obviously sort of unique. What about performance anxiety? You ever get performance anxiety?
Oh yeah, all the time. Like, and that's like, again, I've been in sales for a long time. And
what types of things give you performance anxiety?
Not being where I feel like I should be in any given situation, right? Like the pressure you put on yourself, or if you're months missing my number, right? Like that's always a sales thing. When you know that you have to get to this number, and for whatever reason, it seems like everything in front of you is just going to complete shit. And you can only do so much, right? And it's just this impending doom of not hitting it. It's terrible and it is an awful situation to be in. It's
I
gonna
don't think that's
happen.
why I'd want to work in sales. That doesn't sound.
It's awful. And there's times where you're absolutely crushing it because it's not always a capability thing. Yeah, that's another one. Imposter syndrome is another huge one. It's like, I shouldn't be here. How'd I get here? I'm not qualified for this, when reality is you probably are. You're probably more qualified because nobody knows what they're doing. I think is the reality of life.
Talked about a lot in medicine.
I think I believe it exists everywhere.
Yeah.
Like I really do. Like I can only imagine. When you say it's talked about a lot in medicine, like, do you have specific examples you can share?
Oh, I mean, people, imposter syndrome among doctors, right? And the point, like, the constant discussion trying to remove the stigma of feeling of imposter syndrome. And their point is like all doctors or many doctors have imposter syndrome. And I think,
what is it, do you think, about like doctors specifically, or the medical field, that could contribute to imposter syndrome? Is the fact that it is almost that caregiver situation we're talking about? Like, these people are in your care, like you're doing something for them.
I think part of like if I don't know like actual numbers, right? But if like let's take the assumptions like imposter syndrome is very high in medical professional community. I think a big part of that is, if that is in fact true, is the selection process of how they choose doctors, right? I think when you take all the things that add up to be a good candidate for medical school admissions, the types of people that excel at yielding those metrics very often tend to be people that want to operate in the known realm. They want to operate in the objective, measured. These are my test scores. This is how well
Facts
I'm
versus
doing.
Interpretation.
What's that?
Factual information versus like interpreting something.
And the reality is, so then you spend years basically grooming these young doctors to constantly watch test scores and metrics, and they're really good at improving themselves based on the metrics that are presented to them. Then you get out into the real world of medicine. And the reality is, the real world of medicine is using all of that as a foundation, but ultimately operating in the gray zone probably 75% of the time or more, right? There's a lot of things you're inferring and a lot of patterns and things like that. There's a reason why experience does matter, right? And it's because there's that ability to sort of, I don't want to make medicine seem as like flying by the seat of your pants as it is, but in many ways, you kind of do have to have an element of like instinct of like reading the tea leaves a little bit, right? I mean, there's some stuff that's like textbook, cookie cutter right out of the textbook. Like if you've studied the textbooks, you're going to catch this or see this or diagnose this 100% of the time. Sure. But by and large, that's not most patients walking through the door. Most patients walking through the door is a little bit of like, oh, this kind of resembles that thing I've seen. Oh, I saw this thing a year ago that was a little, sort of an abnormal presentation. This actually kind of looks a little bit like that. Maybe I should keep my eye on that. And you're sort of piecing a lot of moving parts together and never really being 100% sure. And I think that freaks a lot of people out. A lot of people, that especially the types of people early on in their careers that are the type of people who are just bred to be academic machines.
Well, they're used to having all the answers, right?
Yeah.
Like they go through this world of always having the answers, and the second you have that ripped away, and you have to interpret and kind of, I don't want to say fumble your way through, because I think they still have more answers than they probably think, and they're operating with that information and making the best judgment based on that, right? Like,
Welcome to the show, Carlos. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate the support. We're obviously talking about anxiety tonight. Right now, we're talking about imposter syndrome specifically. So let us know what kinds of things make you anxious.
And I think something you laid out earlier plays into this is operating in that gray zone. Like I said, I would have considered myself an anxious person, but I found ways to alleviate it and not sweat the small stuff, right? As long as, like you said, I can keep my eye on the greater path, like I'll figure the rest of it out. Like, even though those thoughts may still be there, it's pushing them aside and understanding, that some of the little stuff just isn't worth it, right? And there's a lot more gray, and that's not all bad. It's not all good. Just living in that gray zone.
For me, I felt that was one of my greatest strengths, right? Because here's the thing, right? Don't think you got that past. Calm down there, honey boo boo. Mm-hmm. I think there's other people that take that like to the other far extreme. They're almost like ignorantly operating in the gray zone because they think it doesn't matter or whatever. Yeah. You have to really ride a sweet spot where you have to not let the unknown scare you, but you have to respect the unknown.
Right.
And I think like here's a great example. This happened so many times in a short, obviously intern year of training. You get a call for a consult from the ED and, they tell you some bogus clinical story and you're like, why are you bothering me with this 3:00 in the morning? Like, blah, blah. Okay, fine, whatever. Like, I can't just blow you off. But what you're like in my mind, I'm thinking like, this is the stupidest 3 a.m. phone call. Couldn't you have just waited till 6 or 7 o'clock? Like, call during the day. Like, why do you have to call me in the middle of the night? And I think that is the element, like thinking that way is the element of like being okay not having every bit of information operating in the gray zone. Now, then you lay back down. You're like, I'll deal with this later. This is not important.
Mm-hmm.
And then two things happen. There's two different ways that people go after they lay back down in that situation. There's a person who falls back asleep. Then there's the person whose wheels start turning. They go, well, what if the emergency room doctor, they don't fully understand the situation. So they said this, but really this is what's happening. And I was like, well, if it's actually a bleed, it could be a serious situation that I'm not taking very seriously because I'm relying on this. And the scenarios of how you disrespecting the unknown could actually bite you in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
And those scenarios start playing through your head. And you're you know what? I need to prioritize the safety of the patient and doing the right thing over my sleep. I need to go look at this patient myself. I need to go look at the imaging. I need to do diligence to make sure that my comfort operating in the gray zone isn't ignorance.
Yeah. And you don't want to disregard something. Like there's times where you need more information to even be able to determine whether it's
and I
good,
think
bad, or something completely in between.
And admittedly, right, experience will better equip you to know when it's appropriate to kind of like blow off that phone call versus not. And obviously, the less experience you have, the lower your threshold should be to just not to take a second look and not blow that off. But I think you get the people that on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? The imposter syndrome, like the unknown elements just overwhelm them to the point where they're like, I'm not equipped to be here. I can't
like they feel like they don't
space. Yeah. I need all the information. Then you have the people that are like, I don't want to hear anything more. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And then like somebody dies because they're not paying attention. You want to be the person that's in between.
Right.
Have enough confidence where imposter syndrome is not crippling your ability to operate in the gray zone, but don't be so arrogant that you just
think you can blow it off because it's not.
Yeah, blow it off or just drill a hole in the wrong side of someone's head because you didn't look at the imaging first or whatever the case is. I mean, I'd like to say those things never happen, but they do. And generally, arrogance is the root of it, sadly. I think occasionally, ignorance and, incompetence can be the root of such things, but the frequency in which incompetence leads to medical errors like that versus arrogance, I think you would see
more on the arrogance side.
Much more arrogance being the root cause of medical error than ignorance.
After 8 years of schooling, I'd hope it's more arrogance than ignorance, but
that's been my personal experience. It could be different, other places, other people. Can't say that that's like a hard and fast rule. Anyway, so.
Well, on the topic of anxiety, is there anything scientifical that causes anxiety? Like, are there certain...
Can you hear Alicia screaming in the background?
Yeah, I heard that one. It's getting a little louder.
That made me laugh.
Yeah. But is there like a scientific
cause of anxiety?
Yeah. Not even like cause of anxiety, but what's happening for that anxious feeling? Like, is there a biological response in the brain when you're anxious?
Short answer is yes. The long answer is that I have not actually had time to do the background research that I usually do every week, so I don't have any like quotable references off the cuff. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely biological roots. Now, there's going to be, neural mechanisms that lead to the normal feelings of anxiety, right? Anxiety to some degree has been evolutionarily beneficial for human beings. So I don't want to paint anxiety like it's always going to be like a complete biological disruption of the brain. But when you start crossing into those pathological mechanisms of anxiety, yes, I mean there's also there are biological roots for pathological anxiety, especially ones that do respond to medical therapy. But you can also have iatrogenic anxiety.
What's that?
So iatrogenic is anything that is physician made. What is the actual translation of iatrogenic? Iatrogenic, relating to illness caused by medical examination or treatment is the actual definition. So basically, like if I give you, let's say you have a headache, and I give you a medicine for your headache. Great, the pain in your head goes away, but that medicine makes you nauseous, right? And you throw up. Right. I made you throw up because of the medicine I gave you, not because you're sick and you threw up. So we would refer to that as iatrogenic vomit or iatrogenic emesis, meaning like my interaction, my treatment as a physician caused this problem in you. It's not a problem that you're having, right?
Right. So you're saying it's almost... Are you saying just from a medical standpoint, like anxiety can be induced from like medical things or just anything in general?
No,
It's like
medical
something...
things, right?
Okay.
Like, it can be a side effect of a medication. Yeah. If I give patient methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, if you don't need methylphenidate from a basically like ADHD perspective, if I just put a normal person on methylphenidate, it's gonna get them hyped up, and it's gonna give them tons of anxiety, heart palpitations, physical anxiety, and emotional anxiety.
We always end up talking about drugs, but I know people that have had that effect from THC as well, right? It makes the heart race. They start panicking. They have anxiety from that, or even what's the other one? You said Ritalin. What's the other ADD medicine? I'm blanking right now.
Adderall?
Adderall, man. Adderall's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, Bishop's not wrong. Yeah, that's definitely right. I mean, in general, right? Is why I mentioned, right? Anxiety has evolutionary benefits. Part of your sympathetic response right? What your sympathetic response from an evolutionary perspective is generally a survival mechanism, right? A lion is lurking, or you're like in the woods, you're a primitive human being trying to survive in the jungle, and all of a sudden the birds stop chirping, and you're just the woods are silent. All the other animals have run for cover, right? And you start getting really anxious. It clues you in. Your sympathetic tone is elevating. And you realize it's because there's a predator. It's about to pounce. And then you start running, right? It's all sympathetic response. So now when you take that sympathetic overload and you induce it in a human being who is not in an appropriate environment to be sympathetically stimulated,
it's going to induce anxiety.
it's just going to make you crazy anxious.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's why when you give like a stimulant to a patient who doesn't
need
necessarily
it, makes
need a stimulant, it's a big side effect of that is going to be anxiety.
That makes sense. I've always wondered why that happens for stimulants specifically, or when something reacts like a stimulant.
I mean, I'm sure my explanation is probably overly simplified. You could ask like a pharmacologist like why, probably, and get a much more technical answer. But I mean, that's the gist of it, right?
Makes sense to me.
You're basically stepping on the gas pedal of a car that's in park.
Mm-hmm.
The engine's revving, but nobody's going anywhere. You're not running from anything. So, but yeah, the idea of iatrogenic is anything induced by the physician or the treatment, right? Like if you come in and get surgery and your surgical wound gets infected, we would call that an iatrogenic infection. If we didn't do surgery and slice open your skin, that you would never have gotten an infection. You wouldn't have just gotten an infection out of nowhere. You got an infection because of what we did to you.
Right.
So, yeah. So I think now's a good time to transition to the second half of the show, or whatever the final segment, our anxiety and current events. So before we get into that, we just want to thank everyone for being with us on this fine Wednesday evening for our weekly Rad and Norty show on all things brain and spine, making the parts of your body who make you you interesting, fun, and exciting, and easy to understand. Thanks for joining the show. If you want to support what we do in our nonprofit organization, Brain and Spine Group, scan the QR code in the top corner, learn more about us. You can donate on our website, or you can click the join button on the YouTube channel. For $4.99 a month, you can become a part of our YouTube community. We don't content gate anything that we do. We keep all of our things open and publicly accessible. That's part of our mission as a nonprofit organization. And we do that through the generous support of our YouTube members and website contributions. So if you want to be a part of that, please join the Brain and Spine Group family. Help us continue to keep our show live and active. On that note, let's go into the current events and anxiety. Norty, you've pulled up some interesting stuff in the news. Where would you like to start with anxiety, current events and anxiety?
This is one that I don't think we got to this one last week, but it covers depression and anxiety, and it's from CNN Health. It says long-term exposure to dirtier air can increase your risk of depression or anxiety.
Let's see if I can pull this up and we'll read through it together. I have not read any of these ahead of time this week.
I was skimming it. Long and short of this one is they're finding a direct correlation to where if you live in an area with higher pollution, you're more prone to anxiety and depression, but they can't pinpoint exactly why.
Interesting.
So it's just this, they know it's there. Is it a direct correlation? Maybe. Later, Bishop, appreciate you stopping by. I hope you have a great night as well. You and the missus.
Have a good night, Bishop. Yeah. Appreciate you joining the show. So let's see. This was a study published in JAMA Psychiatry. Interesting. So I think this would actually go in line with, I actually have done a little bit of basic science research in a related realm, looking at air pollution and the impact on stroke, how well the brain recovers after a stroke. And basically what our research showed is that recovery from a stroke is worse when you have chronic inflammation in the brain. And then our work also showed that chronic air pollution exposure elevates the baseline level of air pollution in the brain. And then we kind of brought that all full circle to show that long-term exposure to air pollution worsens the outcome of a stroke.
Now, is there from your studies or what you think is that just a lack of oxygen, or
I mean, that's ultimately what it boils down to, right? But the idea is that when you've got tons of inflammatory markers, a lot of the inflammatory cells, those white blood cells, sort of constantly flooding the brain tissue, it kind of like junks up the circulatory pathways a little bit, and in general makes the recovery of the brain worse. So, and basically what this work has been showing is like there's similar correlates with I mean, because I think there was also an article we looked at last week that was showing, and this may have been more of a basic, like an actual scientific research article. I don't think it was like a current events article. That brain inflammation was associated with depression. And then you take an article like this that shows that air pollution is associated with depression or increased rates of depression and anxiety. So then from my experience, I would bet with a fair bit of confidence that either the research already exists and I just haven't found it or looked at it, or you could do the research and probably come to the same conclusion, that what you would find is that living in higher areas of air pollution leads to higher levels of basal inflammation in the brain, and that those inflammatory mechanisms that are chronically elevated in the brain lead to pathologies such as depression, anxiety, or worse, stroke outcomes. So I think it all comes down to what we call neuroinflammation, the inflammatory state of the brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting. So you said it boils down to a lack of oxygen or just not clean air cause it. Well, this one in particular, not clean air causing inflammation in parts of the brain that could ultimately be leading to depression.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very.
All the junk in the air leading to, I think it honestly probably causes an overall elevated inflammation of the whole body.
I was gonna say, and I feel like that could,
your lungs are going to be more inflamed.
Yeah, and I think they mentioned something about this even being related to Alzheimer's at some point, which again, that makes sense compared to some of the other things we've talked about. Like it seems like that could just lead to so many health issues, especially if you're already prone to it. I think that's a lot of the times we talk about like some of these brain issues, you could already be genetically prone to or predisposed to some of these things. So I don't know why my eye burns. Probably anxiety. Probably anxiety.
It's inflamed.
Yep, it's inflamed. Air pollution. Air pollution.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly,
I can imagine that just enhancing it for a lot of people.
Yeah. So inflammation is honestly the root cause, or I don't want to say root cause. It
contributing factor.
An aggravating factor, contributing factor for a lot of different pathologies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think that someone who studies immunology or has an immunology component to their research background is going to basically find a link to so many different pathologies, right? You can study neuroinflammation and be an Alzheimer's researcher. You can study neuroinflammation and be a Parkinson's disease researcher. You can study neuroinflammation and be a stroke researcher. You can study neuroinflammation and be a depression or anxiety researcher. Like it, and this is just the brain, right? I mean, there's so many inflammatory states that affect other parts of the body. I think the brain and the central nervous system is just so incredibly sensitive to
and they're also
inflammatory states.
they're also intertwined as well, right? Like, they all talk to
Can
one
you
another.
elaborate?
They all talk to one another, and they're all connected, right? When it comes to, like, think about what we were talking about, like dopamine and all the different uses, or why ketamine can be used for so many different things. Like, all these channels in the brain are always talking to each other, or connecting,
I
transmitting
see what you're
things like
saying.
that. And it can be such a touchy thing, to where inflammation in any one of those parts could trigger something.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, you're talking more like global inflammation. This is not inflammation affecting like only a certain part of the brain or throwing like a certain network out of whack.
But what I guess what I was getting at is, you get inflammation in one specific part, it's going to throw something out of whack, right?
Well, sure, but I don't think that's what we're dealing with here. Now, granted, this is a topic I would love to really. I want to do a show on this topic, but
Mhm.
it's one of those topics like I want to do it really, really well. I don't want to kind of just like YOLO swag do a show on it.
Possibly look up articles 3 minutes before we're going
Yeah.
on, something
No,
like
I
that, which
want to
we've never
spend. I
done,
want
by
to
the way.
spend like a lot of time prepping
Yeah.
for this show because I think it's so cool. NMDA receptor encephalitis, which there's a whole book written on it that I have not read, but I've heard really good things about. That I believe the basis of the book was a neurologist. It's called Brain on Fire. I believe it was written by a neurologist who had NMDA receptor encephalitis, and a big portion of the book is about their experience of basically going insane as this autoimmune disease like ravaged their brain. And then obviously it's a treatable disease. So they were treated, they were able to recover, and then look back on that experience and write a book about what it was like. But that's where you get into like a neuroinflammation, but autoimmune. So it's not like an external or exogenous stimulant like air pollution, something from outside the body
something from
stimulating.
within.
It's literally within the body, causing the body's immune system to attack something within that belongs in the body. They normally, right?
That one we need to do a show topic on that one when we have time to
It's one of
prepare.
those show topics that, I don't want to do it all willy
That's
nilly.
fair.
I want to read this book. I want to like really dive into some of the research. I mean, that's one of those, like, it may require like more than one show because there's a lot to talk about, and we really want to get into the weeds on it. But yeah, in general, I think the idea of not the idea, but inflammatory mechanisms are just so such an integral part of brain pathology.
Mhm.
And then there's, even in the world of therapeutics, leveraging the immune system to treat things. A big part of what a lot of tumor researchers are looking at are immunologic therapies. How do you basically hijack the body's immune system and teach the immune system to identify a tumor as something that doesn't belong in the body, and basically leverage the body's immune system to go attack and kill off a brain tumor.
That's fascinating.
There's been a lot of research and advancements. So immunotherapy. So you have chemotherapy, and then you have immunotherapy. Immunotherapy is exactly that. Basically teaching the body's immune system to go identify and kill the tumor cells.
How effective can that be this day and age? Like, are there some instances where it's
right tumor, right therapy? That's honestly all tumor is, right? It's matching the right tumor to the right therapy. And some tumors have great therapy options. Other tumors don't have great therapy options.
Yeah.
But the reality is, let's take GBM, for example. Well, why can't you just go in and cut it out? Well, you can. The problem is this tumor is so invasive. It's it has little microscopic weeds
It's just
all
like it's
throughout.
got like hooks and everything.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So you can go in and you can scrape out all the tumor that you can see. But if you could see individual cells, there's going to be cells hiding all over the brain that you can't see. But then you say, okay, well, what can see those cells? Well, your body's immune system can see those cells. So if you can program the body's immune system to basically seek out tumor cells and kill them, right? Because that's what it does when a virus or a bacteria gets into your body, right? It identifies the virus or the bacteria and it goes and it kills those, cellular or subcellular organisms. If you can teach the immune system to do that for a tumor, then yeah, you could probably make some headway on, a tumor like GBM that's not as simple as just cutting it out of somebody's body. So match the right tumor to the right therapy. Yeah, it is effective. Now, I'm not saying we've made great headway with GBM. I mean, I'm sure honestly, I'm not really up to date on GBM research, but in general, we've made headway, but it's still a deadly diagnosis. That being said, it's purely an academic. I think that the number of people in the world that a GBM affects versus like TBI, TBI is like one of the leading causes of like injury and death in the world. GBM is like, well, I don't want to get too political, but it's like caring. I don't want to say we shouldn't care about people with GBMs. That's not my point. Point is, right?
It's small. It's a small percentage, which is like
very small percentage of the population.
But how do you quantify one person's life, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's also, I mean, and this is where you get into like, almost like general, like look at the number of neurosurgeons in the world, like academic neurosurgeons that want to operate on tumors and do research aimed at improving tumor therapy. There's no shortage of them. You can find them everywhere. Look for a neurosurgeon who wants to do research and improve the outcomes of TBI. And I mean, it's improving, but in general, like it's crickets, literal crickets.
Well, and that's why,
and if you just look at it from a pure numbers perspective, you're like, it doesn't make any sense. One of the largest disease burdens in the world, and not a single, such a small number of neurosurgeons even want to help work on the problem. Then you've got a tumor that affects like such a small number of people, relatively speaking, and it's like every neurosurgeon in the world wants to like solve this one problem. Yeah, that's my perspective. Maybe that's a wrong perspective. I'm not claiming to be the authority, but yeah, that's kind of tends to be how I see the world.
What I always
that's
say,
why I like working on TBI.
And I'm with you, and I think this is something I bring up all the time, and I'm sure people are tired of it. Is the brain's fascinating. There needs to be more research on how it works, how to cure certain things that we can't necessarily see or isn't just a glaring problem, right? Like I think TBIs fall into that category. Is like,
yeah, TBI
they're a problem, but how big of a problem are they? We probably don't know the full extent. We may never know the full extent.
TBIs are definitely something I put in like that's the glaring category, but for some reason it's not a sexy enough category that people want to figure out.
And again, how do you, when somebody has a traumatic brain injury outside of a bleed or something like that, like how do you really know the effects? Like in things like I'm blanking. What's CTE, right? Yeah. CTE. How do you know? You don't until they're dead.
I think there's also something about like prospects that like interest people or don't interest people. Like I don't know if this is true. I'm kind of taking a guess here, but I would venture if you looked at the number of people doing research on, I don't know, pick any neuropathology, brain problem, and compare it to the number of people doing research on, say, autism. How many people you hear are like autism researchers? Not many. I don't think, and I think it's because the prospects of like finding a cause or a cure even though I think even using the term cure is controversial these
I was
days.
going to say that
because some people are of the mindset that autism is not a disease. In which case, okay. I'm not here to argue with you, but in general, right? So, how many people are researching autism and biological mechanisms of autism versus, I don't know, Parkinson's disease, right? How many people what's the general? How many people are affected by Parkinson's disease versus autism? Let's see. How
I would assume
epidemiology
autism's higher by a lot.
of Parkinson's. What's that?
I'd assume the number of people affected by autism are way higher than Parkinson's. Would be
That'd be my guess. But let's see.
my guess.
Parkinson's Foundation says more than 10 million people worldwide are living with PD. So prevalence is 10 million. Incidence of Parkinson's disease increases with age. No duh. An estimated 4% of people with PD are diagnosed. Okay, that doesn't matter. Okay, so they're saying, I don't think prevalence is a great measure, but let's see. They're saying 1 million people in the U.S. live with Parkinson's disease. 90,000 diagnosed with Parkinson's every year. So they're basically saying an annual incidence of 90,000.
Okay.
So let's take those numbers and we'll compare them to, what was my original Google search, epidemiology of autism. Autism. CDC, data and statistics on autism. I don't know if you can trust data from the CDC these days, but let's see what they have to say.
It's what we got right now. Let's see what it is.
It's funny. Actually, I don't want to say this is funny, but so obviously we had a death in the family a couple weeks ago. My wife's grandmother passed. She had a big stroke. We all miss her, but it was not an unexpected situation at all.
Mm-hmm.
She had tested positive for COVID, which she was not sick prior to her stroke that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm.
No one had any reason to believe she was symptomatic, but she had tested positive for COVID, and maybe she did have COVID. And it's possible that her stroke could have been from COVID. COVID does create a hypercoagulable state, and there's plenty of research that shows that COVID increases the rate of stroke. Now, this is somebody who's had strokes in the past. The risk for a stroke was plenty high, COVID or no COVID. Like, this situation would not have surprised me. But, like, that's counted as, like, a COVID death. And it's like, okay, like, really? Like, come on. That's where it's like.
I think we were talking about something earlier on in the chat where you got to meet your numbers, right? Somebody's out there chasing COVID numbers.
Man.
I shouldn't make light of that.
Them COVID numbers are dipping a little too much. We got to make sure we get some.
Can't let it die. You can't let COVID die off. You gotta get some numbers up.
Anyway, that unrelated story aside. So let's see. Here, let's see. Prevalence. 1 in 36 children identified with ASD. Whatever. Nearly 4 times more common among boys and girls. I don't know. They're saying 1 in 36 children. I don't know what that ultimately
extrapolates to
in terms of a comparative.
Because we don't have like a population. Because what was the other one that said 1 million people in the U.S.?
I have no idea.
That's what they said was living with Parkinson's, 90,000 a year.
Combined prevalence per 1,000 children. 2020.
I think that's something. Honestly, that alone is something to consider there, right? Like, most people with ASD have autism. Like, it's going to affect them from the time they're born, right? Parkinson's typically isn't going to affect you until you're a little older.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something to consider.
That's one of the
You would
reasons.
assume.
Well, so that's one of the reasons why I would probably personally compare incidence over prevalence, because prevalence is like how many people are currently living with the disease, right? So if Parkinson's disease gets diagnosed later in life and then those people die, right, they're going to have generally, like you would expect that to have a lower, like let's say all things are the same, right? Same number of people, like the same rate of there's the same rate of Parkinson's disease as autism, but Parkinson's disease gets diagnosed later in life and then people die, versus people who are diagnosed early in life and then live their entire life with autism, right? Your prevalence of Parkinson's disease is going to be lower by nature, right? Because it's diagnosed later and then the people die off. But that's why I was kind of looking for an incidence number, which is like basically this number of like how many new diagnoses are made every year.
Right.
That's a little more statistically independent of
Yeah.
the age, right? If you assume that like roughly like the same number of people are being born every year that are dying every year, obviously that's a very rough estimate.
But it's theoretically some context.
Yeah, like generally, like I think that's more comparable. I could have just made that up. I'm not a statistician, but in my mind, that's why I'm looking for an incidence number. I kind of want to know like how many new diagnoses there are every year.
Right.
But so if they're saying 90,000 people are diagnosed every year, I guess maybe let's
how many kids are born?
How many kids diagnosed with autism every year? Autism stats and facts. Let's see what Autism Speaks has to say. Prevalence. Everyone wants to report on the prevalence. I want the incidence.
Can you see how many kids are born and then do some quick math? 1 in every 36?
Maybe.
That might be the best way to do it.
I'm going to take one more peek, and if we don't find anything,
we'll chalk it up.
We're going to scrap it.
That's fair. That's fair.
WHO estimates 1 in 100 globally. Nobody wants to report on the incidents.
Can't report on the incidents.
Country with the highest rate of diagnosed autism in the world is Qatar. That's interesting. The country with the lowest rate is France.
Interesting.
That's interesting to me. I don't know why. It's just interesting. The state with the highest rate of diagnosed autism is Florida. Interesting. State with the lowest rate of diagnosed autism is Texas. It's because everyone in Texas just got kicked by a horse or something. So they don't know if it's autism or Jimmy down the street done got kicked by a horse 10 times. Something stupid about that boy. I'm just looking for more interesting facts on autism. I've come up with nothing. The rate of autism in the U.S. went from 1 in 150 in 2000 to 1 in 100 in 2022.
I said 1 in every 36. Where are we?
I don't know. Over the last 10 years, approximately 707,000 to a little over 1 million individuals will enter adulthood and age out of school-based autism services. Over the last 10 years? That doesn't really help. If you divide these numbers by 10, probably puts you somewhere between 70,000.
That's just people aging out.
Yeah, but I
Maybe
guess I'm
people
kind of
older.
using that to kind
That
of
is
make
like
like a rough estimate of like, okay, well, that's kind of like a cross section, right?
right. So I guess that would put the numbers pretty close to one another.
So if you took these numbers, yeah, divided by 10, they would put them like fairly close to each other. Somewhere between like 80,000 to 100,000. So, and then obviously Parkinson's disease at
So
90,000 falls right in
yeah.
the middle. I had no idea. That's like super hardcore back of the envelope, like epidemiology. But I don't know. Maybe my assumption is not correct that autism is more common or more people are affected by it than Parkinson's disease. Maybe I'm just wrong about that, but I don't know. Anyway, on that note, I think we've had an interesting show tonight. I'm ready to wrap up.
Yeah. Closing thoughts on anxiety.
Closing thought, and I'm too anxious to discuss it. Too easy. Honestly, I feel like it's a tough one.
I think
Pathological anxiety is like I've seen really bad anxiety that's like needs to be treated.
what would you classify that as? Let's
I don't.
end it
Well,
with
here's
that.
the thing. I don't think I have enough experience or authority to really answer that question that way. But I do feel like there's tons of people like you can tell they're anxious, right? And that's
Mhm.
I think a good question. Maybe there's a question we'll part ways with tonight for people to contemplate. Do a lot of people really have anxiety, or do we just have really bad means of coping with normal anxiety to the point where it becomes like unmanaged normal anxiety, or is truly pathological anxiety that needs to be treated really really prevalent and undertreated?
And I personally think it's probably somewhere in the middle of all of it. It's probably more gray area, but I do think we have.
Yeah.
I think it leans more to the side of we don't have good ways of managing anxiety as a society. Like I don't think it's. And
Yeah.
this is another one of
Well,
those things where I don't think it was
I
even
mean,
really
we have
talked about.
pharmacologic management,
Yeah,
honestly.
and I don't
I
think
don't
I don't think that's the way to go about it. Like it comes to like what we talked about with depression. I think these two go hand in hand. If it's external factors and you're just not managing those, like is a pill really going to help you? Or are those anxieties still going to
Yeah, I
exist?
do tend to agree with that.
And
And I know, like, I mean, I can think of like people I've had conversations with where they're like, I'm thinking about starting medication for my anxiety. It's just gotten really bad. And it's like, look, if that's what you think you need, okay, but I know you, and I don't think this is a. I'm not saying this as a medical professional. I'm saying this as someone who just knows you. I don't feel like this is something you need to treat medically. I think this is something you need to learn. You need better coping mechanisms for. And I think we under appreciate, or we have, I think society at large has underdeveloped stress coping mechanisms.
I agree. And because that's what, like I said, I would consider myself anxious, but I've never thought that I needed to take something for it. I found ways to manage it for myself. And again, like that worked. And is it the solution for everybody? No. But I just think we lack that as a society. I agree with you.
Yeah, I think there's like societally large components of that, right? We live in a very fast paced world. We live in a very connected, everything information at your fingertips type of world. And I do think that provokes a lot of anxiety that people 100 years ago didn't have to deal with. Now they had to deal with, in many ways, I'd say like, it's this like sort of ease of our society that like we don't struggle enough. So the body like emotionally struggles in exchange for our lack of physical struggle. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think I brought this up when we were talking about depression too, is these were things that I don't think were talked about as frequently as they are now.
Yeah.
So because of that, society never really started approaching the fact of here's how to manage it, here's how to cope with it. Like it never became ingrained in our society as a
Yeah.
normal part of everyday life. And population grows, things evolve. Like it never gets addressed until it starts getting talked about.
Yeah. Anyways, on that note, we're gonna wind it down. We
What's
thank
next
everyone
week?
for joining us
What's the
tonight.
cause?
What's that?
What's next week's show, and then why are we all here today?
Next week. That's a great question. What are we doing next week? Let me look.
Let the people know.
I have to let myself know.
I don't know what it is either. Otherwise, I would have said something.
Next week is looking. Fear. How fear works in the brain.
That works. That stems right into anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
This kind of gets we're gonna staying along these survival mechanism type emotions. So we're gonna be talking about fear in the brain next week. I hope you join us. 7 p.m. Wednesday next week, the usual time, the same place, with a different topic.
Bring your fear. Be ready to share your greatest fears. I know I'll be ready.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, before we go, don't forget, scan the QR code in the top corner. Learn more about Brain and Spine Group, the nonprofit organization that brings you the Rad and Norty show, along with other shows and educational material aimed at improving brain and spine health around the world. If you want to be a part of that mission, please go to our website, learn more about us, and leave a donation in support for what we do. Or feel free to join our community on YouTube. There's many ways that you can support our mission. And we hope that you'll consider becoming a part of the Brain and Spine Group family. So on that note, we'll see you next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Rad and Norty.